What's up, guys, and welcome back to MoAn Inc. If you guys are new here, then hello. My name is Erica, and it is a pleasure to have you joining me today on the channel. Because for today's video, as you can see from the title, I am chatting to award-winning historian and documentarian Bettany Hughes. Now, aside from appearing on our TV screens, Bettany has had quite the career as a classicist and historian. She's been incredibly charitable throughout, including being one of the founding patrons of UK-based charity Classics for All, which is an organisation that focuses on bringing the education of classics and ancient history to state schools and into neighbourhoods where classics is not easily accessible. And she's also published countless non-fiction books promoting the subject, including Helen of Troy, Venus and Aphrodite, and The Hemlock Cup. However, today, we are here to talk about her newest release, which is called The Seven Wonders of the Ancient World. Now, just in case you guys heard that, you guys saw the title and you were like, I definitely know these wonders, why can't I think of them off the top of my head? I'll just give you a little reminder before we dive into this conversation. So the seven wonders of the ancient world are as follows: the Great Pyramid at Giza, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the Temple of Artemis, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, the Mausoleum of Halicarnassus, the Colossus of Rhodes, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria. So today we are going to be diving into as many of those as we can in 30 minutes, Bettany. But before we can get into all of that, I always like to start with a bit of context. And when I was researching you and listening to all of the other interviews that you had done, I was really intrigued to hear about your father and how much of an impact he clearly has had on your life and career, because he was a performer. So he was an actor, he was also a musician, and he was in the entertainment business, which ultimately is, you know, through what you do, whether it be documentary or writing, you are entertaining so many people. So can you take us back to your childhood of, you know, the lessons that your dad taught you and how that sort of propelled you and shaped you into the historian that is now sitting in front of me?
Well, I mean, I think I love my dad. I just want to kind of do a big shout out to him. He was the most amazing man. And as you say, he basically was saved by music and drama. So he was the single child of an unmarried mother in the 1920s in London, which was really, really tough. As you can imagine, there was a huge amount of prejudice. And then she died of cancer when he was very young. So he ended up just having to look after himself from the age of 14, 15. And he got himself an apprenticeship in Coventry as a draftsman, and basically took on a new family, which was the local theatre company. So he sort of didn't, there was nobody else. So this theatre company took him up, and I think he just really felt that it was a way that he could communicate with other people and learn other people's stories. So I always grew up with this knowledge that sharing ideas and sharing stories is a good thing and a very positive thing to do, not a weird thing to do. So I think there was probably just a kind of, you know, understanding that it was something that mattered. And it didn't mean that you were showing off. It meant that you were trying to, you know, share important stories. And I think also, to be honest, because he was then an actor and therefore out of work for most of my childhood, we just used to sit around the kitchen table and have cups of tea and talk about his past and my mum's past during the war. So I think possibly that kind of combination made me care about other people's stories and memories, and, as you say, not think it was a good thing to do, to share those with the wider world.
And encountering history then for you, I know it came in two triggers, or at least this is what the internet told me, you can correct me. But the first being a King Tut exhibit in 1972, and the second being a teacher, is she called Mrs. Anstey?
Anstey, well done.
Anstey.
Very good research. Yeah, Mrs. Anstey.
So these two triggers that happened during your childhood, what was it about these two things that really spoke to you? You know, I guess as a combination with, you know, learning how to share stories and understanding people, that kind of propelled you then into more so academic side of your job.
Yeah, and well, definitely, you're absolutely right. I remember those two things very vividly. So the Tutankhamun story is I was just 5. I think I just had my 4th birthday. I was just coming up to 5. And the Tutankhamun Golden Mask in 1972 had come to the UK. And I remember two things. I remember seeing something about it on television. And then, of course, there was the exhibition at the British Museum. And I still remember the kind of physical emotion of that moment of thinking, all these stories I've been told about boy kings buried in gold in hidden tombs with mysterious deaths, they're true. This isn't made up. And I was so inspired that I wrote my first book, which was my thesis. I should have brought it for you, but anyway, I'll send you a copy of it, which was sort of my theory of how Tutankhamun died. And I got it right, because I talked about some mosquitoes, some spelled S-U-M, very bad spelling, that were a bit germy, bit him, and he died. And we now think that he probably was suffering from malaria and was therefore weakened. It was a kind of combination of things that caused his death. But as I said, that it wasn't a real epiphany for me, that of, wow, you know, truth is stranger than fiction. And then when I was slightly older, when I was 14, we had this, exactly as you say, this amazing classics teacher called Mrs. Anstey, Veronica Anstey, at a time when the classics and history was really unpopular, when people had stopped studying it. It was being branded as an elitist subject, which was a terrible thing, because it meant it was being taken out of state schools, which is, you know, you only make something elite by only teaching it in elite schools. But she was clinging on, and she flashed up onto the screen this amazing chipped, scratched black and white slide of the so-called MoAn snake goddess, which, you know, and I'm sure many people who are watching this channel know, you know, incredible, feisty, ferocious creature with these coal-rimmed eyes and grappling snakes and bare-breasted down to the waist. And I remember her saying, we don't know who she is. We don't know whether she's a goddess or a priestess or an ordinary woman. But she was broken as if she was radioactive waste and buried under a stone slab. And I just thought, I have to get to the bottom of her story. You know, something which has this incredible impact, is 3,500 years old. You know, we have to try to understand her. So I think that was the moment where I thought, actually, this is the path that I want to be on, to be a career historian.
And then you go to study at Oxford, and you studied under Robin Lane Fox, who I've also interviewed, who's brilliant. I'm so jealous that he was your professor. But something that he said to you that seems to have made an impact anyways was that he said, don't be an armchair historian. And so I'm wondering, I guess, how much of this idealized of a career, I mean, did you even think you would ever be a documentarian? Did you not know where it would take you? And then did, you know, Robin Lane Fox saying that to all of his students and to you change that path or reinforce something for you?
I think that's taught me how to be a good historian. So what he was saying was, go to a place where history happened. And he's absolutely right, because not only do you understand better the archaeology of that place and the geography and the culture and just, you know, even the climate, it really, really helps. And I also think, you know, you should respect those whose histories you're writing about. And if somebody was writing a biography of me, I'd hope they'd go to visit my childhood home and, you know, try to sort of get under my skin a bit. So I think if you can, you should travel. And he absolutely taught me that. So that taught me how to be a good historian, I think. And then in terms of sort of putting it onto telly, it was really, I was just very, very, very aware there were only men who were authorial voices out there. And I didn't understand why, because I could see a lot of women historians, a lot of female archaeologists around. I just genuinely didn't get it. And, you know, famously, I went in and had this meeting with a BBC producer who said, this is in the 1990s, who said, can I tell you 3 things? 1, nobody's interested in history anymore. 2, nobody watches history programs on television. And 3, nobody wants to be lectured at by a woman. And, you know, this is the 1990s. It's not
Lovely.
the 80s. So as you can imagine, that put a certain degree of fire in my belly. And I thought, I just have to prove you wrong. So it was one of those interesting psychological and historical examples where a negative, I had to turn that negative into a positive. So it was almost like seeing the size of the hurdle in front of me that made me think, this is something I have to try to vault over.
And you absolutely did. clearly, which is why we're chatting today.
Yeah.
But something that, coming to your book, which I was really curious about is as you've been doing the promo for this book and, going on to various podcasts and talking about it, you've said that of the seven wonders, you've been to the Pyramid of Giza the most, that you've been there and you have sort of like the longest history, your own history, with that moment of history. And I was wondering, when was the first time that you went? And do you remember the impact that the pyramids had on you?
Yeah, so quite relatively late. So I didn't, as you know, I've spent a lot of my time in Turkey and Greece and that bit of the Eastern Mediterranean. So from the age of 18, that's where I've traveled and backpacked and slept under the stars and, done digs. And weirdly, I didn't get to Egypt until my 30s. I had kids quite young, and then it didn't seem like just the right time to travel with them. So I was probably mid-30s when I first saw the pyramid, and I can't remember the Great Pyramid. I can't remember how many times I've seen it since, but I'm never not astonished by it. It's still overawes me. Just this, again, this monument, which is 4,500 years old. Actually, the latest archaeology probably tells us it's 4,600 years old, so 100 years older than we thought, just a year or so ago, and yet it's still standing virtually intact. And the precision and scale and sophistication of its construction is just, as I said, mind-blowing. So I never tire of it. And if you think all the facts we all know about it, 2.3 million limestone blocks, well over 450 feet high, the heaviest building still ever created by human hand, we think. And yet there it is. So I just, it reminds you of the power of wonder, but that wonder is something which, if you wonder, you connect, and if you connect, you understand, and if you understand, you care. And so I think it's something that, for whatever you think about it as a project, it forces you to care about other people on the planet, even if you're separated by millennia. So it has its own potency as the monument and as one of the seven wonders.
Okay, as you were talking, I have two questions in mind. I'm going to try one and then we'll go to the other one.
Yeah.
So the first one is because you started off by saying that, you traveled and you have, obviously, with your documentaries, but also prior to that, you have lots of stories of like going to Istanbul for the first time at 19 and those sorts of things. There was a story that you told. This says a lot about me. This is my favorite podcast. It's the BBC Private Passions. Love that podcast. And you did a talk with them years ago. But you mentioned this story and you glossed over it. And I remember going back to listen to it in preparation for this because I was like, am I remembering this correctly? And I did. And I was wondering if you could iron this out. You had a story about going to, Romania. And you went to Romania and you said that you got into a bit of trouble, but that Latin helped you get out of it. That's the part I'm curious about. How does that work?
Well, I'm glad thank you for listening to it, and thank you for being interested in that story, because it is quite an amazing one. So I was in Romania at the year of the revolution, and I'd been looking at old European figurines. So these, amazing female figurines, the extraordinary sort of thick and beautiful things. And I was studying them, and the revolution happened. I was in Tigre-Mureș, the revolution happened. I went back home, and then I came back very quickly because I suddenly thought, I sort of feel duty bound to be telling people about what's going on here. But I was really naive. I was in my early 20s. The Securitate hadn't really been dispelled after Ceausescu was killed. So there was still this secret police system that operated there. So of course, as this young, single, 20-year-old London girl who'd sort of come in and come out, they thought there was something dodgy going on. So I was arrested, and I spoke no Romanian, but Romanian is basically a modern version of Latin, pretty much. There are differences, but I could speak Latin. So I kind of managed to negotiate my way out in this kind of pidgin Latin. And I think I just think they felt sorry for me, because for them it was probably like, like me being arrested in, I don't know, a country that speaks Arabic now, and trying to sort of negotiate your way out in ancient kind of courtly Arabic. And so I was let go. So it was Latin. It kind of proves, at the time, oh my God, it was really useful, but it also proves why these languages matter, that they're the basis of so much that we, you and I, probably 40% of the words we're using now are of kind of Greco-Roman origin. So it's never irrelevant, that ancient world and those ancient languages.
That's iconic. If Latin needed an advert, like that's the advert for Latin. Like you can negotiate your way out of a police arrest. Don't worry, guys.
I wouldn't recommend it though. Oh my God. It was pretty hairy when it happened. But yeah, Latin definitely saved me.
Well, so again, coming back to the promotion that you did for the Seven Wonders, something that you said even at the Waterstones Piccadilly event that I met you at, which I've heard you say time and time again, is that you do not like small, dark spaces. This is something you make very apparent. You're like, nope, don't like it. Thinking of the pyramids, you've mentioned that, you got to crawl in the pyramids. You're like, oh, not for me. But for me, the thing that's really interesting about this is that this is something you actively don't like, something that you actively fear, and yet you do it again and again and again. And it has led to the most incredible adventures for you, not only in writing this book, but also in your documentary series. So I think that a lot of people are going to hear that and think, oh, I can relate to having something that would have potentially stopped me from going after what I wanted to do. Even if it is something like that, somebody might say, oh, I'll be a documentarian, but no small dark spaces. So sorry, no documentary that includes that.
Yeah.
So what do you do to self-soothe? Like, what's a piece of advice that you can pass on to somebody who's listening to this that's like, oh, I really relate to that. How do I push past that like Bettany does?
Oh, well, again, it's a lovely question. I think, weirdly, I think Greek myth helps me, because I am genuinely scared. I mean, and it's not good, because I start to think I'm scared, and therefore I start to panic a bit, and therefore I can't breathe. And that's the worst thing that can happen to you when you're, underground under however many millions of tons of, limestone and granite, as in the Great Pyramid. But so the story of Perseus, which, sorry about I'm in central London, so there's all kinds of excitement happening outside. So the story of Perseus, as you know, is I think basically the story of, the greatest thing that we all fear is fear itself. So it's the notion of being afraid, and it's the fear of that sensation of fear. And I just remind myself of that. So I think of Perseus. So what Perseus was doing was confronting not just monsters, but fear of those monsters, fear of failing as well. And if you just have a moment of rationalization, that I find that is when my heartbeat goes down. It doesn't stop me being anxious initially, but if I manage to make myself think, other people have done this, other people have gone through this sensation, other people have been afraid, then it calms me down. So I guess the basic thing is, you're not alone in your fears. There'll be somebody else who's had experienced something the same as you, and therefore if you're not alone, you've got a companion with you as you're experiencing some kind of severe difficulty, like getting stuck in a underground when in a place you shouldn't be. Because I mean, there are snakes and scorpions and like,
no.
oh,
No.
I don't even want to go there. But yeah, you have to keep doing it.
I think that's a really lovely piece of advice, actually.
Oh, great.
So I have seen a question that everybody asks you, and even at the event that I met you at, everybody wants to know what your favorite wonder is, why it's your favorite wonder, but also if you could nominate like another ancient wonder, which to History Extra, you said that there was like a colonization of archaeological digs in the south of Turkey that are like 10,000 years old. And you were like, oh, I'd nominate those. So you've had every question thrown at you regarding the Seven Wonders. My question is, if you could dethrone one of the Seven Wonders, if you could write your own list, because obviously, as we know, it changed a lot anyways, and it was Bettany's 6 wonders of the ancient world, which one would you dethrone and why?
Oh, that's a really, really good question. So which is at the bottom of the pile? Gosh, that's really tricky. I think it's hard because they're all extraordinary. oh gosh, it's terrible. It's asking, like, choosing between your children. You can't do it. Okay, so here's a very diplomatic answer. So I think maybe the youngest one, so the Lighthouse of Alexandria, because the Lighthouse of Alexandria could join, because it's slightly different from the others in that it's not a site of pilgrimage itself. It's slightly more about a kind of rational approach to the world. It's lighting up a very different kind of city, very sort of modern, futuristic city in the form of ancient Alexandria. So I might nudge Alexandria off on the understanding that it could join a new list of the 7 technological wonders of the ancient world. So it's not lost forever. It's just shunted into another pile.
That is so diplomatic. I thought of this in a totally different way. I thought of this question. I was like, okay, let's think of uses of them. And so I went, okay, the most useful stay on the list is basically what I was doing. So I was like, okay, we'll do that. So it means that the bottom is the Colossus of Rhodes and the statue of Zeus at Olympia. And I decided that the Colossus of Rhodes, because that was pretty useless, it fell and it wasn't, that can go. That's why I decided that one is off the list.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's interesting because those were the 2 that sprung to mind immediately. So I'm exactly the same as you, Colossus and a statue. But then I thought you can't get rid of the Colossus because it represents this very beautiful thing of conflict being, sorted out through diplomacy and negotiation. And even if that's slightly inflated from the actual reality of ancient history, it's a lovely idea that it stood as a sort of landmark to these, these siege weapons being melted down to create a huge sculpture. And I also thought of the statue of Zeus, which isn't my favorite because it's so macho, and it sort of represents this kind of such a sort of uber competitive approach to life, which has its place, but isn't my favorite thing. But then I thought, the crafts people who created that and this hippopotamus ivory skin and those crystal flowers, how could you, and gold, whatever it was, ton of gold used, and the olive oil slick bath underneath that it was reflected in. How could you get rid of that? So I just, I'm
surprised that you said that though, because I mean, at least from what you wrote in the book as well and what you've said in promo for this statue at Olympia, it seems like you had a really personal experience at Olympia because you were there right at the start of the pandemic. So it was just kind of you and the site and the birds. Like that must have been incredible.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right. So it was the first day of Europe's lockdown. So we just managed to get back home to the UK, but Greece was looking down and we were there. I was there to research, but exactly as you said, we'd driven all the way, woke up the next morning and thought, it is really quiet. Why is it so quiet? And the site was closed and all the hotels were closed. People who had Greek phones had been texted to say stay indoors, but because we had UK ones, we hadn't got that message. So we walked down to the site and it's, as you said, without any sound of the 21st century. So no cars, no coaches, no, electric drills or lawnmowers or, kids' bikes. The saturation of the air with birdsong, because Olympia was a glade, a very fertile glade, still full of olive trees and walnut trees and laurel. And so that was a moment where I thought, thank goodness I haven't been an armchair historian. I've just come here and I've experienced something which at its most peaceful, Olympia would have had this as an exquisite impression on those who made pilgrimage there. So I do love Olympia, but it's the statue of Zeus isn't my favorite. I'm impressed by it. It's not what I'd take. It's not what I'd rescue in a fire or take home to bed with me.
Wait, why is that the standard?
I know. People always say that, don't they? They say, what's the thing in your home? And that is quite a good question, actually. Would you rush? I'd go for a locket that my mum gave me, there often is. And actually, ironically, it did burn down in a fire in Constantinople, the statue of Zeus. So poor thing.
So everyone else agreed with you, is what we're getting at. Everybody else was like, wouldn't run back in for that. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's too big, but minus that, even if it was pocketable. Not doing that.
Exactly. Yeah, it was incinerated. So no, but very good question.
So then as a final question, Bettany, just to round off this interview, I think people, everybody knows the 7 wonders. They at least know that phrase. But I guess because these are the 7 wonders of the ancient world, maybe we could leave them with something of what's new. What is there new that's been discovered or found or discussed? And why should people still care about these wonders?
Yeah, well, you're right, because, they were made a long time ago, between 4,500 and, 2,200 years ago. So you'd think that their story sort of finishes once they start to disintegrate. But of course, we've got incredible archaeology, which is telling us all sorts of new, exciting things about how they were made, what they meant to people at the time, why some of them survived longer than the others. The Great Pyramid at Giza is a kind of classic case in point, where there are these brilliant excavations at this place called Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea, which was a harbour. So they were man-made harbours, human-made harbours, again from about 4,500 years ago. And they were built partly to bring the raw materials for the Great Pyramid up the Nile, from across the Red Sea and up the Nile. And in this harbour, there are 30 or so deep caves, again, human-made caves, some of which are 100 feet deep. And they were used as storage buildings, like magazines. And because, of course, Egypt is so dry and preserves things so well, incredible things have been discovered there. So ship's rope that's 4,500 years old, the shoes that sailors wore, anchors which have got their names inscribed on them, and 1,000 papyri fragments. And the 1,000 papyri fragments talk about a man who was in charge of the raw materials being taken up the Nile to build the pyramid. So we suddenly have a much better idea of exactly what was used, exactly what it cost, what the system was, how it was built, that the pyramid was built. The River Nile used to be much closer to the base of the pyramid than it is now. And when it floods, there's a kind of 7-meter inundation. So it can raise stone blocks 7 meters high. So we're pretty sure that kind of hydro energy was used to help build the pyramid. And these are ongoing excavations. So, I mean, that's just incredible. It's incredible, the fact that people have been asking themselves how it was built, and it looks like we've now got a lot of that evidence. So it's the kind of joy of archaeology. And I guess the kind of question as to why we should care. It's a good one, why are we sitting here talking about these 7 ancient things? And I think there are 2 answers. One is, as a species, we love a list. So we love the idea that if you put things down on a list, I'm a great list maker, it brings rationality and reason to the chaos of the world, and somehow you're in control, and it kind of catalogues it in a way that we can understand. And the ancients were obsessed with lists. So the 7 wonders was actually found on a list of lists. So a list of the 7 best mountains, the 7 most beautiful springs, the 7 finest generals, and that really helps the ancients. So I think the fact that it's a list reminds us that it's quite good that we do this random thing of finding a number, adhering a list to it, and then somehow that makes us feel as though it's got some kind of symbolic importance. And that's a good thing. That helps us walk through life confidently. But then more emotionally, it seems to me that we live in a world which is very unwonderful in a lot of ways, that, we're very ready to create rather than to create chaos and to destroy things rather than simply to create. And if we think about the power of wonder, because a wonderful thing reminds us that if we collaborate, we can achieve beyond the possibilities of the individual, that we're a hyper-social species, that we love joining together to be awed by things, and we love joining together to wrestle with problems and to make things. So even though they aren't squeaky clean, these monuments, and many were built on the backs and on the blood of the enslaved, they still represent something which is good about us, that we want to collaborate to make things, and we want to privilege beauty and inspiration and aspiration and pioneering work. So they feel to me as they're very positive examples of human endeavor in its broadest sense. So for me, that's one of the reasons we still need to care, because we all need a bit of wonder in our lives.
I could not agree more, Bettany. That was such a lovely note to end on. Thank you so much for joining me today and for taking the time to sit and chat to me and all of my viewers. And of course, as I say all the time, thank you guys for tuning in consistently to this channel, because without you, there would be no way that I could bring on guests like Bettany and have the chance to rack their brains. Now, when it comes to the 7 wonders of the ancient world, you can find the book linked in the description below, so definitely go and check that out, as well as some of my favorite talks here on YouTube from Bettany Hughes and other podcasts that you guys can be linked to that I would highly, highly recommend in order to hear more about this topic, but also about Bettany's work, documentaries, etc., etc. So thank you guys so much, and I'll be seeing you next time with more videos here on MoAn Inc. I'll see you guys then.